Mary Shelley was born in Somerstown, London in 1797. She was the second child of the feminist philosopher, educator, and writer Mary Wollstonecraft, and first child of the philosopher, novelist, and journalist William Godwin. Mary's mom died of puerperal fever 10 days after Mary was born. She lived a very literary life. Her father encouraged her to learn to write by composing letters, and her favorite occupation as a child was writing stories. Her first published work is often thought to have been Monsieur Nong Tong Pa, comic verses written for Godwin's publishing company when she was 10 and a half. Though this has been questioned, whether she was 10 and a half or not. Mary was a British novelist, short story writer, dramatist, essayist, biographer, travel writer, and editor of the works of her husband, Romantic poet and philosopher Percy Shelley. In 1817, they spent a summer with Lord Byron, John William Polidori, and Claire Clairmont near Geneva, Switzerland, where Mary conceived the idea for her novel Frankenstein. When Mary was 19, she wrote one of the most famous novels ever published, Frankenstein, otherwise known as The Modern Prometheus, in 1818. When Mary was 20, she wrote Mathilda, 1819. When she was 24 years old, she wrote Valperga, 1823, a 14th century romance which wasn't very successful. At 27 years old, she wrote The Last Man, 1826, which talks of the destruction of humanity by war and plague.
All right, just test it for recording. The story of Frankenstein begins with a man named Robert Walton, an explorer who throughout the prelude writes a series of letters to his sister Margaret Savelli. Robert comes from England. He has a passion for traveling the seas and is captain of a ship headed on a dangerous voyage to the North Pole. In his first letter to his sister, he tells her about all the things he had to do to prepare for this journey and what drove him to risk his life to go in the first place. Robert tells her of a desire to accomplish, and I quote, some great purpose, which happens to be either finding a passage to get to the Pacific Ocean or to reveal the source of the Earth's magnetism, or perhaps to simply set foot on unexplored lands. In his second letter, Walton tells his sister about his lack of friends. He feels completely isolated from his shipmates and also feels too uneducated to find someone understanding and sensitive enough to share and discuss his dreams. Walton thinks of himself as a romantic. On page 8, he says, and I quote, I am practically industrious, painstaking, a workman to execute with perseverance and labor. But besides this, there is a love for the marvelous, a belief in the marvelous, intertwined in all my projects, which hurries me out of the common pathways of men, even to the wild sea and unvisited regions I am about to explore. It is this belief that gives him the incentive to continue along on the perilous, lonely path he has chosen for himself. In his third letter, he simply tells his sister that they have finally set sail for their destination and that he has full confidence that he will achieve his goal. In his fourth and final letter of the prelude, he tells his sister that their ship had stalled in between huge sheets of ice and that they had caught sight of a gigantic creature about half a mile away, guiding a sledge away from them. The next day, they saw another sledge, but this time being pulled by a lone dog with a man on it. When Walton finds this man, he's weak, starving, and sick. At first, he's reluctant, but eventually the man lets Walton and his men take him back to the ship. This man turns out to be Victor Frankenstein. The two eventually become friends, something Walton had lacked up to this point. Eventually, Victor confides in Walton and tells him his tale. This is where the story really begins. This prelude is extremely important because it sets up one of the most important themes in the novel. That light is a symbol of knowledge and discovery. It is this theme that connects Walton and Frankenstein. In Walton's first letter, in the very beginning of the novel, on page 1 near the bottom, when Walton is describing what he hopes to find when he gets to the North Pole and beyond, he writes, what may not be expected in a country of eternal light. Like Robert Walton, Victor is also chasing after that country of eternal light, which is unprocessed knowledge, the unknown. It is this connection that helps the two become friends, and why Victor decides to tell his life story to Walton and only to Walton. Walton's quest to reach the northern part of the earth is similar in spirit to Victor's quest for the secret of life. Both seek ultimate knowledge, and both sacrifice the comfort of the known for the unknown in their respective pursuits. Victor begins his story talking about his family and how a girl named Elizabeth was adopted and joined their family. The relationship between Victor and Elizabeth and the attraction they feel for one another is illustrated as romantic love. Opposites attract one another, and it's illustrated as the ideal relationship. Throughout his childhood, Victor didn't socialize or mingle with any of his other classmates. Victor had his own social circle, which consisted of Elizabeth and his childhood friend, Henry Clerval. These attributes of Victor are extremely reminiscent of Robert Walden's. Like Victor, Walden spent his time on the voyage in isolation and thinks of himself as a romantic as well. More of a reason why the two become such good friends and get along. Whenever something bad would happen, like the poverty and eventual death of Beaufort, who was Victor's grandfather, and the orphaning of Elizabeth, the presence of a close, loving family quickly alleviated the pain. With only a family and one friend to fall back onto, it seemed obvious to me that something had to happen sometime soon to force Victor down a path of darkness and despair. The death of his mother, which occurs in Chapter 3, forces him to withdraw from his comfort zone, which up to this point was his family, and decides to put all his focus on his studies to accomplish something great. Once again, a parallel to Robert Walden.
Victor was very fascinated by the mystery of creation of life. He begins to study the anatomy of life and how it falls apart, such as life and death. Could everyone please turn to page 32? Please turn to 32, and I'm going to read out a quote. Victor states, "Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through, and pour a torrent of light into our dark world." I feel that he understands that there are two extremes, life and death. He must break through the understanding of both to bring life from nothing. After years of study, he has mastered all his professors have taught him. Vic then wanted to go further. He wanted to discover the secrets of life. He trapped himself in his apartment and neglected everyone, his friends, family, studies, and social life, to be completely focused on what he wants to accomplish, creating life from death. Victor finally brings his creation to life. When the creation comes to life, its appearance scares the hell out of Victor. Scares the hell out of him. Vic then rushes to his room to try and go to sleep and forget what has happened, but has nightmares of Elizabeth and his mother's corpse haunt his dreams. He wakes up to a grotesque creature smiling at him above his bed. Vic meets up with his friend Henry and is very delighted to see his old friend. He brings Henry back to his now haunted house. He enters the house and considering he was so weak from staying up for months while working on his creation, he becomes seriously ill, and his friend Henry helps nurse him back to health. When Victor comes back from his illness, Henry gives him a letter from Elizabeth, Victor's future wife, who is concerned with his illness. He brings Henry to the university and the site of any chemical or just speaking with his previous teachers and or professors, brings back the knowledge of what he has done and completely torments him. I feel that a good amount of monstrosity is shown in this story. Victor creates the monster. It says on page 33 that he collected bones from the charnel house, which is kind of like a morgue, dissecting rooms and slaughterhouses to furnish his materials. I find the way he made the creature to be sort of monstrous. There is obviously a form of monstrosity in how the monster is portrayed. He is 8 feet tall, he is hideous, ugly, and the monster is also rejected by society. Later in the story, the monster kills Henry and his wife Elizabeth. I feel that the idea of murder is very monstrous. Some may also say that Victor is monstrous for creating the horrible beast. Even though the creature is so hideous and horrifies Victor, Vic still finds a form of beauty in the beast because he created it and accomplished what no one has accomplished before.